Excellent. So just a quick recap for an intro. I'm John Labadorf. I'm the head of strategy for Google Pay and Google Wallet across all of EMEA. Broadly, those products include the online product, which if you go onto an e-commerce site and you say a little checkout with GPay, that would be one of the products in my scope. Another big product is the Google Wallet, which you may have seen was rebranded and launched last year. That obviously includes the in-store kind of tap and pay feature, as well as passes, supporting passes, loyalty. And then the new products, the identity, so think mobile driver's license or national IDs, as well as the digital car keys and other access products that we've been building. What I wanted to talk to you all today about is a kind of a more meta point that we focus a lot on in kind of digital platforms like a digital wallet. The concept around building a flywheel that basically connects a user base to some type of third-party partner base, and then kind of how do we create that sustainable kind of flywheel where for every dollar invested or every user onboarded, the cost per that individual becomes lower, because otherwise, basically your product is not scaling. So let me put on my slides. By the way, so I think the format we were thinking was we'll do 30 minutes of some light slides. I'm not really going to talk to the slides. I'm going to talk a little bit more about like the general concepts and some of the examples. At the end, I'll do a broader example as it relates to digital wallets, because I think digital wallet really is a hyperscale type product. And then the last 15 minutes, regardless of where we get to and me just rambling, we will have 15 minutes of questions. So I'll make sure that everybody has an opportunity if you have questions about any of the content or anything related to the products. I probably will not speak too directly to any upcoming product feature releases or things like that. But more generally, how we think about basically growing or scaling the product. I'm happy to answer any questions around that. Excellent. So for some of you on the phone, you may have an aspiration. I think most of us do. We all want to build the next fintech unicorn. We see this in a lot of different places, especially in the fintech space. It becomes that ubiquitous product used by millions of users. It has billions in valuation, and obviously, the real objective here is we get fame and fortune, and we can go off and buy an island in the South Pacific, and never have to be seen again, unless obviously we see what's happened in the last 6 months with AI, and suddenly a founder reemerges from out of nowhere. But not to digress, what you see on here is a lot of good examples of flywheel type products and companies. When you think about product like Klarna, it's become such a ubiquitous name. It obviously has been in existence for a number of years, but how did they get to that point where not only do they show up in a lot of checkout features, and now even showing up in checkout features around, like, say, delivery for food, they become ubiquitous as a name related to buy now, pay later. So the question is, how did that happen? And there's a lot of hard work that goes into it, but there's a lot of flywheel mechanics that have to be put in place to effectively start to cause users to directly interact with merchants in such a way that a Klarna does not have to do marketing anymore. The marketing is done by the user base or by the merchant base, independently of Klarna specifically. So just before we go into kind of how we do that, what is a digital flywheel? Well, really, at a base level, what we're trying to do is obviously we are in the middle as a digital platform, but we want to kickstart of direct interaction between our users and, let's say, a third-party partner base. And in that model, there will be flywheels that happen across the user base. So if you think about, say, a peer-to-peer payment product, the ability to, basically have a sustainable product like that, not only do your users have to be aware of it, but you have to have enough other users on the platform that it actually is valuable, so that when they download the a Cash App, they don't have to check whether or not their friends have it. It's ubiquitous. And then similarly with a flywheel with the merchant base, and there obviously is challenges in a number of markets with a digital wallet. We have to have partners onboarded to even make the product work. This obviously can be extended to marketplaces. This is another great challenge that Amazon faced for a long time, and the way they solved it was basically onboarding a whole bunch of third-party sellers in Southeast Asia, and basically allowing them to sell their products directly to consumers through, obviously, the Amazon marketplace. That kind of coverage or access to these merchant products basically starts to create this flywheel where merchants are able to directly interact on the platform to users, and then users back to merchants. And in that way, the strength of the platform increases as more and more users and partners are coming onto the platform. Another way to visualize this, which is what we do a lot internally, is we visualize it through a user funnel. And basically what I've done here is to get to a single user who is constantly using a product. The first thing that I have to have is I have to have partners onboarded. And I also need to not only have them onboarded, but my users need to be aware that the partner is onboarded. Great example with the digital wallet, you depending on whether you use Apple Pay, Google Pay, is you add your credit card or your debit card. Is it going to actually work? Or are you going to get some error code that says please contact your bank? A lot of that user friction needs to be resolved, and being able to raise awareness that yes, with Chase, all Chase debit and credit cards you can add to Apple Pay or Google Pay, and some of that challenge also exists with marketplaces. So let's say you want to buy a Nike product. Are those going to be available on an Amazon marketplace? And that challenge of I go on Amazon and I go, hey, I want this specific Nike product, and it's not there. There may be you may have a specific moment with that user where they may not come back to your platform just because they didn't find it that product that one time. And that really becomes a challenge that we face, because basically not allowing the user to use the product has a huge friction, and we see a lot of drop off in being able to capture that user at some point in the future. Then once we have that base coverage, we start to look at how do we raise awareness, and more than anything, get them to consider the product. Obviously, that then leads into hopefully a first-time user, and then we have other hooks where we try to get them to become a long-term retained user. So from an awareness perspective, obviously there's the traditional search engine optimization, app store marketing, what we call direct marketing or direct response marketing. What you'll see later is, at least in a digital wallet type product, these are obviously really helpful, but the co-marketing aspect that we do with partners actually trumps, from a response perspective, any search engine optimization and app store marketing that we can do. The reason why is because, especially in today's world, there's so many different wallets. Users, when they get prompted with, say, your specific app, the question that they're gonna okay, great. So I'm aware that your product exists. I have no idea how I would use it, and more than anything, I don't know whether I could use it with my bank card. Let's say, for an example, and that that hurdle of I don't know if I could actually use it with what I use today is more important than a user being aware of your product specifically. Lastly, around consideration, and I'll talk a little bit about this more. Incentive campaigns for a product like a digital wallet are exceptionally important. They're costly, and we talk about onboarding users, and it can cost up to $10 per user, but it's really important, especially for different groups of users. With say a financial product like a digital wallet, there's a fear, and so you have to kind of almost have to pay the user to take a chance on certain products, and that concept of security, fear, and trust really does end up being a really important part of where you do your consideration marketing. So last thing before I go in kind of the steps, what are the top 10 reasons digital platforms fail? And this is a generic framework, by the way. So a lot of what you'll see in these slides is fairly generic. The idea is not to really talk a lot about this, but more again about the examples. I would say the biggest thing that we see across the board is can't scale the product. And again, my definition of scaling is for every new user, is your cost per user going down? If it's not, you don't have what they call positive jaws, you might as well, wrap it up, because at a certain point, the fixed cost of maintaining the product will continue to rise, because you obviously have to continue to add more data servers and things like that, data storage, but you'll also have to keep paying the same amount per user, and it eventually starts to fall apart. And there's a couple examples globally where there is a struggle to basically acquire and retain users, and the cost really hasn't started to go down. A good example just generally is the Indonesian digital wallet market. It's such a huge opportunity that there are so many competitors there today that each of the digital wallets are now having to pay a high fee through incentive campaigns on a monthly basis just to retain their users. And so each user has 3 or 4 or 5 different digital wallets on their phone, and every month as the incentive campaigns change, they have to the user just goes off and uses the different app. So the digital, it's a race to the bottom effectively. And so in that example, you're basically waiting for one of your competitors to fail. Second one, little to no market for their product and services. I won't talk too much about this because this is basically, the base. If you don't have this, then, it's probably more fundamental problem you have with your product. Pricing and costing issues. Again, I think that, the basics of this are pretty standard. But again, as you start to think about setting up flywheels and scaling, cost becomes a really important component in terms of whether or not you're being successful. Lack of user awareness to consideration. Again, going back to the funnel that I showed before. Actually, I'll pull this up. What you see is awareness, can be solved through your traditional direct marketing, but realistically, you need to be thinking about using more scalable, solutions like co-marketing, as well as the consideration aspect of incentive campaigns to basically get them to try your product. And then lastly, competition. If you build a really good product and you have a lot of user opportunity, you're inherently going to have competition. I mentioned the Indonesian digital wallet market. I would potentially say the US has a similar problem, although the penetration of digital wallets in the US is still quite low. So I wouldn't say that we're at a place where competition has started to become extremely fierce. There's some natural barriers, obviously, between, say, Apple Pay and Google Pay in terms of the basic requirements of having different phones, but the overall penetration and usage is still too low. So just quickly on causes, I've already talked to a number of these, but why can't you scale the product? Some of this is going to be around your cost model. This also, what I have here around user behaviors. This is a really important one. When you're thinking about user behaviors, there's a typical consulting pricing or projection model that basically says how many users can use your product, and we use that a lot in digital platforms where you say 300 million users could use your product, but realistically when you look below the hood, there's only a certain segment of users that are actually exhibiting a behavior that's similar to your product. And I'll talk a little bit about this in an example later, where for digital wallets, the most adjacent user behavior to a digital wallet is actually, at least from our perspective, is the use of mobile banking apps. And so when you look at the percentage of users who use a mobile banking app, let's say even in the US, it's a fraction of the total population of users who could actually use a digital wallet. And so when you're thinking about how many users you could actually onboard in a near term, let's say over a 12-month period, you need to be more realistic about who you're actually going to be able to target and acquire. Let's see if I wanted to add anything else. Yeah, the little known market services pricing, those are just a lot of foundational problems that you're going to have. Awareness, consideration, again, we talked a little bit about this. Competition, maybe the last thing I will say is, and you see this a bit in the digital wallet space, this might actually be in the way that you approached partnering with different players in the market. If you didn't design your product with a clear partner value proposition in mind, so basically, let's say in a digital wallet example, working with the banks that issue the cards, you didn't have a clear strategy of, hey, issuing bank, our product not only helps your users, but it also helps you in terms of your bottom line. In many cases, what you can end up doing is turning that partner into a competitor. And we've seen that in a number of markets with digital wallets as well, where certain markets, especially in Europe, had decided to go off and build their own effectively competing digital wallet. There's a couple examples in, say, France, and one that's slightly, I would say, explicitly a direct competitor, but similar space in Spain. And realistically, if we had probably spent more time working with them to build that ecosystem together, they may not have decided to build a competing product. So what I put on the slide, none of this is going to look super fancy or earth-shattering in terms of what we have here. There's obviously a lot of nuance, but there are certain aspects to this that are really, really important. So when we talk about target audience, and I have another slide on this, but one of the things that's really important to distinguish is you're going to have an addressable market that's basically the total number of users that out of the box can use your product. But the more important number that you need to figure out is who is likely to use your product, and you can kind of work that number through by looking at adjacent user behaviors. Moving on to clear, seamless services. If you're building a digital platform, complexity is not what you want. And I mean that from a onboarding perspective, from a usage perspective. There's also, and I haven't really baked this into this deck, but other aspects around how you turn that basic user into a super user. But the base requirement is you have to have very simple, clear, seamless services. Be very clear on what you're going to provide, what you're not going to provide, and how you're going to resolve any conflict. I think the great example that has done pretty well is models like Klarna, where they basically say it's no fee to the user. Obviously they're having to change some of that model, but they've been very good at just saying this is what we provide, this is what we don't. Lead with lighthouse partners. This is, again, if you have a platform, this is really, really critical, especially if you want to hit scale and really set up that flywheel, because you can pump all the money you want into marketing and doing all that direct response, but it's much easier to go and use the channels that your partners can provide, especially if they have a large existing user base, versus having to just pump, above the line marketing into your product. This becomes really critical, especially when you're doing new market entry. Let's say you have a digital platform and you want to take that to a new market. Finding the right partners to launch with is super critical if you want to gain traction very quickly. Generate user demands. Again, a lot of this comes into specific marketing aspects. And we'll talk a little bit more digital wallet concept. And then track the results. Obviously, this is really, really standard stuff, but there's a couple ways to look at this framework. Obviously, there's the intra product performance tracking. So basically, when they, let's say, digital wallet, load a card into your app, do they use it? Where do they use it? Is there any error rates? How high are those? But you also want to be looking externally in terms of your user funnel. So on the App Store, do you have good conversion? Do you have a sense of that? And then obviously, when we talk about partners, we also want to understand whether or not our partners are happy. Because if they feel appropriately incentivized to make your product a success, you can kind of, basically take a month off and go to the beach, because they will then drive the growth of your product. And that's ultimately, where you want to be. So I'll talk just a little bit, and I'll speed this up so we have 15 minutes. Again, target audience. What do they really want? What's optional? And anything that's optional, really throw that out. There's been a number of digital wallets that have kind of, these super apps. And you're seeing a lot less of the, the financial super apps in the world. But, a user may not want all of those features baked in. And so if you start kind of loading up your app with a whole bunch of stuff, and the user that isn't very clear on what you provide versus other apps, you can really lose a large segment of your audience just through confusion. The business model. This is another one that we've seen a lot, where the app really provides a great product, but it has no path to being sustainable. And I don't mean, it has to make millions upon millions of dollars, but at least has an understanding of how it aligns to you, your users, and your partners. So that's basically the value proposition. And then competition, again, the way to avoid competition is to basically take any potential competitor and then turn them into a partner. And you can do that through the design of your product from the beginning. Lighthouse partners. The first thing I actually really wanted to just hit real quick concentration in the industry. So when we talk about lighthouse partners, how much work are we going to have to do to get to scale? And in setting up a flywheel, if you have a really fragmented market in which you have to partner, think, when Amazon started doing the third-party sellers out of Southeast Asia, these are small companies. And so if you really want to get suitable supply on that marketplace, you have to onboard loads, thousands upon thousands of potential partners. And it takes a long, long time. In the digital wallet example, in the US, there's roughly 10 different banks that make up 50-60% of all cards. However, if you look at a market like the Netherlands, there's 3 banks that make up 90% of market share. So if you want to get to 90% coverage, you only have 3 partners that you have to focus on, and that level of effort is orders of magnitude different. Again, incentive models, turning potential competitors into long-term partners, that's really, really important. And then lastly, having an understanding of how your partners are going to interact in the platform, because even though, let's say in the digital wallet example, and there's still friction in this, we have this problem as it recurs somewhat regularly, is whose problem is it if the product stops working, or if a user can't load their card into the app? Is it my problem? Is it the partner's problem? Has the partner thought about how they're going to correct it if it's something that I can't solve for? And so really working that through up front will avoid losing certain portion of your users over time. User demands, again, direct is the basics, but if you have a platform, you really should be thinking about other models to raise the awareness and consideration. Incentive campaigns are costly, but if you have a product like a financial product, Klarna is a good example, or a digital wallet where many users may not trust you. The question is, how do you gain that trust? Well, one of the ways that you do it is you basically pay for it, and you pay that through incentive campaigns. But again, I keep coming back to this point. If you have a really scalable product, and you have big lighthouse partners that have material market share, again, digital wallet, let's say in the Netherlands, where you have a partner that has 35% market share, leveraging their channels and their user, to reach their user base is going to be the most cost-effective way to, one, raise awareness about your product, as well as if they trust, let's say that issuing bank, you can use that trust to help incentivize the user to try out your product as well. And then lastly, around tracking the results, a lot of these are really basic out of the box type things that you just kind of have to have. But I do think the way we've broken this up of like intra product analytics. Do you know where your friction points are? You're obviously trying to resolve those. Again, that's out of the box stuff. But more meta point is, where is the next set of users that you want to onboard? Where are they coming from? And obviously that comes through just having a general understanding of who you think you're targeting, but you also have to have an understanding of how efficient your user funnel is working. Some of that obviously comes back through customer feedback and NPS scores, but that all needs to start working together to basically ensure that not only do you have sufficient users today using your product, but you have a pipeline of users that potentially will use your product in the future. And then again, I've hit this several times, partner feedback is super critical. especially if you have a platform. If you have partners that are unhappy or they don't see the clear value proposition to them, they don't see it hitting their bottom line or improving their ability to reach their customers, you're going to have a problem as well. And there's been, you could potentially use the example of Uber with some of their drivers and things like that, where the drivers became unhappy with the way that the business model worked, and it's caused a disruption over the last several years of them to be able to provide a suitable service delivery model. Okay, I know we're basically past the 30 minutes. I will leave this slide up, and so I can talk to some of this more in depth. I've obviously talked a fair amount about the digital wall as an example as I've gone through. So maybe I open it up to questions, and I guess I can take them in chat. I don't know. I think that's the best way to do this. Any questions? Everyone's quiet for a Friday. No questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
How do you prevent your partners from stealing your business?
Yeah,
Assuming they're bigger than you.
Yeah, that is a real challenge. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I would say there's probably two aspects. One is I've talked about here, which is really around having an appropriate incentive model and having a clear understanding of the value proposition that you provide to partners. So when we talk about digital wallets and say issuing banks, and I would say there was a wave probably starting about 5-7 years ago where banks were like, we're all going to go off and build our own digital wallet, and we're all going to basically prevent the Google and the Apples of the world from disintermediating us from our customers. And so they all kind of went off and went through this wave of launching different wallets. I would say the failure in that was the Apples and the Google. I wasn't here at that point, so I can say someone else's problem. But basically, there was not a very good approach to building the partnership and the value proposition. What we do see today, and we spend a lot of time with banks around this, is we do, like, our products do generate underlying revenue for them. So then the next question is, so what prevents them from building their own app? Some of that is in the skill set and culture that different companies have. What we do see with say issuing banks is they're not always very good at building very slick, clean, simple products. They have a tendency to try to build these clunky apps, and so some of what prevents certain partners becoming competitors is if they're smart enough to know that, hey, I'm probably not going to be successful in building this. It may also prevent them. And so some of that is also in the way that we message to our partners. Hey, it's kind of like, hey, let us provide that experience for our combined users, and we'll make sure that we continue to generate revenue for you. The third is more around this concept of super users. If you can create a good population of super users using your product, even if your partner decides to go down the path of building their own product, it's going to be much harder for them to start to peel away your users. And they may upfront realize that a great example is Apple Pay. It's become such a ubiquitous brand. Nowadays, I don't think any issuing bank would say, yep, we're going to go against Apple Pay. They have a core set of super users that will evangelize their product. And even if another issuing bank built a better product, I don't even know if they would leave. And that's kind of obviously built into the Apple brand. But for sure, they've spent a lot of time on Apple Pay doing that. Now, I think the last thing I'll say around this is time is a real consideration. You may not be able to prevent in the near term a partner becoming a competitor, but the goal is to obviously over time win out through the market and get to a place where I would say broadly Apple Pay and I would put Google Pay and Google Wallet into that perspective. It's become ubiquitous enough that I don't think any in most markets any issuing bank is really going to want to spend the time and money to build a competing product. Hopefully that's helpful.
So by super users, do you mean like super loyal, diehard fan users?
Yeah, exactly. And like that basically are willing to try new features in your product, and they evangelize your product. So they almost like tell their friends, or the way that we measure that is, do they try to use the product in new scenarios without any prompting? A good example is, let's say it's an Apple Pay user. Will they go to a new store, or actually a great example is Apple Pay user in the US goes abroad. Will they try to use their Apple Pay product not knowing whether or not it will be accepted? The answer is yes, it will be accepted because of the way the product is designed. But without us prompting them to say, hey, you can use Google Pay at checkout, a super user will just try. They'll be willing to do that. And the reason that's really important to know is because, especially in payments products, users will not use a form of payment that they don't know whether or not will be accepted, except, and there's the one caveat which I just mentioned, is super users. They'll say, I'll just see whether or not it works. And you'll see that obviously in other examples, platforms, and it is something that you can measure. What is the over time order of magnitude nowadays? When you can you clarify that question? When you say, yeah, Lisa?
Sorry, yeah, because you said that time is a real consideration right now, and you need to think over time. So are you thinking about a year, like 2 years, 5 years? What's the horizon?
It depends on, I would say, like the technology cycle. So if it's going to take several years for like an issuing bank to decide to build, launch, and realize that it probably is not worth their time, it might be in the concept of years. If you have a hyper growth product and you can quickly become, like the litmus test that I typically use is like ubiquitous, which is an amorphous term, but it basically, all your users, all your potential partners are at least aware of the product. That time scale can be reduced. But there just may be a longer, couple year period where you're competing against folks that realistically should just be partners. And and sometimes you just have to be patient. And there are markets that are like this for digital wallets today, as I said. France has the issuing banks do have a digital wallet product. Spain has one as well, and you could broadly say Poland has something similar as well. Yeah. Some changes based on expected track. Example of some changes you made based on expected tracked results. Yeah, sure. So I think the best one is probably a product that we have in the US. We call like I will not try to go into all the different Google Pay brands and why we've named them the way that we have, but we do have a product in the US. It's called Google Pay app, and in the app you can have offers generated. As well as you can do kind of P2P payments and things like that. And so it's at least from my perspective, a bit of a bulky product. It's comes from the era of super apps. And so there's multiple different features, and, we have to have a number of different partners and partner industries engage with it, for the offers, and for P2P, we have to have payment rails that are separate to card networks, and so it's hard to maintain. But one of the things that we realized is that even though we don't see a direct competition to banks, because obviously we're hooking into a lot of existing card networks and existing payment rails, banks were concerned. And so, as a product, we are starting to pivot away from having deeper product features and focusing more on things that are more horizontal and scalable. And that obviously came through some user feedback. It's very hard to generate a very slick, clean app when you have all these different features. How do you create a UX that's quite clean? And then, as I said, the partner feedback wasn't great because they were concerned about the value proposition to them. Yeah, that's probably the biggest pivot we've made in the last 18 months, which is, it's all public at this point, but it's especially in financial services, it's recognizing where within the value system, the ecosystem of partners we fit, and where we can provide value, and trying to stay within our lane. Other questions?
Yeah, one more question. The partnering with a partner for the co-marketing or access to their market share, when is the right time to do that? Like, do you recommend getting some small traction first, or using them as a means to prove your idea?
So if you're at, let's say, pilot phase, I wouldn't be doing co-marketing. If you're kind of at an MVP where you have a base product that's like the product features are stable, and you're launching, that's you want to hit that early. The best example is, let's say you're doing go-to-market entry with an existing product, and you're trying to hook in all of the various ecosystem partners and obviously build demand from users. Do it from the beginning. The sooner you do it, especially if it's tied to a launch, the better return you will get, for sure. Because again, any products that require partners to be directly involved, if there's confusion about where and how they can use the product, if they try to use it and they fail, not because the product fails, but because the partnership was not in place, the chances that they'll come back and try it again is significantly lower than if you make it clear up front where, how, and which partners they can use it with.
Cool.
Hopefully that's helpful. Other questions? I know we're over time. I'm happy to take one more. No. Okay. Thank you very much. Hopefully this was helpful. This for me is something that I like to do. So you might see me again back on the platform. So thank you again. Have a great weekend. And you might hear my voice again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.